Well, it's great to be back. I'm a third timer, so it's nice to be here again. It is a lovely place to be. Marcy and Rich and everybody set just a great tone and environment for these meetings. Dorothy and I have been asked just sort of tell our biopolitical story, sort of how we got here. And I was going to, start with sort of, on a dark and stormy night in 1958, I was born, but where I teach, one of the courses I teach is on law and genetics, and one of the first things I tell my students, since this is where I teach, I'm teaching about law and genetics, but it's at a law school, is I tell them, well, the last biology class I took was in 10th grade. So I'll sort of start there and say, how then does somebody who hasn't taken biology since Nixon was president, come to this point to be working on genetics and law? Around the time I was taking my last biology class, I was getting interested, sort of my entree into questions of politics was around issues of environmentalism, and particularly actually started getting very interested in nuclear energy. This sort of carried me forward into college, where after a couple of years of flailing around, if there was a sort of left-leaning group on campus, I was part of it. And even some, it led to some interesting combinations. But so I was doing a lot of environmental and energy work, and then went more broadly into other political areas and was in CSPIS, which Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, for people who aren't of a certain age. And it was curious at one point, I was like the sort of dissonance, cognitive dissonance of being in CSPIS and also being the New Haven campaign coordinator for John Anderson's presidential campaign was sort of, it's a range. And after college, wanting to sort of keep in with the activist-y side of things, because what was starting to emerge at this point as, after college, you figure out which direction are you going to go. Really sort of until today, number of years, has sort of been kind of ping-ponging back and forth between sort of activism and academia, engagement and contemplation. So this place feels very much like a home in that regards. And so after college, I went to work for the Mass Public Interest Research Group for a while. But the pull of academia, the pull of the luxury of actually being able to think about things rather than be scrambling for, organizing people for their daily canvasses or for the struggle to get funding for campus organizations every day, led me to grad school in history. And so I went to Cornell, and after 3 years in Ithaca, which is the most lovely place in the middle of nowhere you'd ever like to find, I started going stir crazy. And, I started my dissertation and all of that, and I was enjoying it very much, and I was about to jump down one of the gorges. So sort of edging my way out of Ithaca, I went to law school. So I had taken my orals and started my dissertation. It was, I was 3 years in. I said, no, I'm going to law school, and I needed some place that was not Ithaca. So I went to Berkeley, which was, lively and full of lots of good stuff happening. And there had been happening at this point both in Ithaca and then carried over in Berkeley. There was a lot of divestment stuff going on, and I was sort of, tangentially involved in some of that. But, I went to law school as a way of sort of stepping back towards this world of engagement more. And so after law school, I went to work for a big law firm in DC that actually did school desegregation work. And it was, working to get sort of continuing funding for school desegregation for school districts where, this was again during the Reagan era, where they were trying to defund, Reagan and Bush, defund desegregation, and they would hire our firm to do that, to fight that, to sort of say we still need support for desegregation. And got to work as a junior associate to a senior associate named John Roberts. And that's a whole separate story. I didn't really know him that well, but all I can say is he should know better. But again, the sort of the siren call of the ivory tower sort of drew me back. And again, the luxury and the need for a sense of stepping back and getting a sense of perspective on things drew me back to Cornell to finish my dissertation. And I was able to do that in 2 years, which was sort of like my limit, I think. And so I did that. I had the incentive to do that. And you know, I wrote, my first book was actually on public budgets as cultural objects. And you know, how does one get from that to genetics where I am now? Well, actually, there is a connection, believe it or not. And after this book, I started working more on issues of privacy and identity and law. And that led me to the case of John Moore, he of the famous stolen spleen that was commodified, and led to issues of law and commodification of the human body and of identity, not just body, but body and identity. And body and identity and commodification led me sort of back again to race, which was a concern in the school desegregation and equal protection work I'd done. And by that point, I was out in Minnesota, and I heard Troy Duster give a talk, and he mentioned in passing, this was in 2002, this new drug called Bidil that they were doing a clinical trial on. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I talked to Troy a little bit about it afterwards, and I sort of asked the question that became one of my first articles on this, which was, you know, how did this drug become, you know, sort of ethnic? They called it ethnic. And so from that, it was sort of off to the races. So, you know, this was allowing me sort of to combine this work on law and equal protection and identity and race, and they all were intersecting in this area of biomedicine. And that's really where I've been for the last decade or so, working on sort of spinning out the implications of these intersections. And the connection back actually to budgets is you can think of budgets and DNA both as sort of technologies of classification. And this is a sort of fundamental concern I have, the choices we make about how to, and so is race, right? Race, budgets, genetics, they're all technologies of classifications of ordering the world, and they all have political, legal implications to them, economic implications to them, and that sort of pulled that together here. And the work, in particularly on Bidil, has enabled me to sort of step, you know, outside of academia and a bit more back into engagement, which has been extremely rewarding. Mostly, it's been through the means of sort of annoying people in power, but one does what one can. And that sort of has brought me to here, I guess, to join with other people to annoy people in power. And that's my biopolitical story.